All right, I'd like to call to order the June 12th, 2023 Mountlake Terrace Planning Commission meeting to order. Would you please take the
All
roll?
right. Thank you, Chair. Chair Batista,
Here.
Vice Chair Sandoval, Commissioner Thompson, Commissioner Harrison,
Here.
Commissioner Betcher,
Present.
Commissioner Morgan asked to be excused for tonight. Thank you.
All right, I'd entertain a motion for Commissioner Morgan.
Motion to excuse Commissioner Morgan.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. So Commissioner Morgan has an excused absence for tonight. And we're going to wait on everybody else.
Okay, yeah, do we have a quorum?
Well, we don't have a quorum, but we don't have a public hearing tonight. So
Okay.
Staff can still present information. We just can't make any decisions or any kind of votes, which we weren't going to be doing anyway. So we're okay tonight. Had it been that public hearing, then no, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So, all right, item number 3, approval of the May 22nd, 2023 meeting minutes. Anybody have any changes or corrections to those minutes? I am not hearing or seeing any, so we'll go ahead and declare those accepted as presented. Item number 4, public comment. Is there anybody who would like to make a public comment for anything that is not on tonight's agenda? Let the record show there is no public here in person. How about online or via email?
No public comment had been received by 4 p.m. today, and if there anyone in virtual audience could like to speak, please use hand raised tools. Going once, going twice. That ends public comment.
All right, so there's no public comment for tonight. Item number 5, tree code updates and topics introduction.
Hi, members of the Planning Commission. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me about tree codes. I just wanted to briefly describe the situation and what's been happening so far. This is the first introductory meeting that we'll be having about this, but this is not the last meeting. I'll be coming back to talk to you about it again. But the reason that I'm here now is that this Mountlake Terrace City Code on trees and site vegetation has not been substantially updated since 1995. And as you can imagine, we're kind of a bit behind some of our neighbors in terms of our approach to managing our urban forest. So given the accelerating rate of development and the timing of the city's comprehensive planning work, it seems like a good time to look at what we have and consider what we might want to do in the future. So since March 2023, I've convened a small group consisting of a member of the MLT Tree Board, an interested resident, a developer, and myself to talk about tree code, look at what our neighbors are doing in terms of tree codes. And these are the topics that have emerged as high priority from that small work group. First of all, the establishment of a fee in lieu system for trees removed during redevelopment. So fee in lieu can be thought of as a tree fund, monies that can be used to replace or maintain trees within the city. This funding is based on a per tree cost, usually based on the size of the tree. So it's tied, the cost goes up as the size of the tree goes up. So examples of other local cities have used their tree fund are for street trees, arborist services, tree vouchers to residents, acquiring and managing forested land, planting and maintaining street trees, urban forestry education, Arbor Day costs, and other purposes related to trees as determined by the city. This requires the development of a tree evaluation system, which, as I said, is typically based on tree diameter. The second item is incentives for developers to retain significant trees and tree groves above and beyond the existing requirements. Examples would be reductions in stormwater capital facility fees, reduction in required setbacks, and retention of trees for frontage improvements. Currently, our code states that if you have more than 10 significant trees on your lot, you have to retain 20% of them. And a significant tree means any tree above 6 inches in diameter that is not a weed species. So the third item would be the creation of a landmark tree program to protect and celebrate large, rare, otherwise special trees on public property. Private property owners may also nominate trees on their property as landmark trees. An example might be the sequoia that's on the corner of the city campus lot. It's over there. And then finally, updates and clarifications to existing tree code, including establishment of a prohibited tree list and modifications to existing code to promote tree planting. I believe that our existing code should reflect our willingness to promote trees and tree planting, and that willingness should be reflected in the code. Next steps would be further discussions with the Planning Commission, the Tree Board, and I would like to get on the DEIC calendar as soon as they have their board replaced. They are in the process of redoing their board, so I'm just waiting to get to the point where there's a group of people I can talk to. Ongoing work is happening with the tree code team. We meet twice a month, and I would also like to start collecting public opinion on what we should do with tree code during our summer events and direct some of that traffic or people who are particularly interested to an online survey so that we can present an understanding of what people want in the community when we move this to the point of approval by City Council. And I also just want to mention, before I open it up for questions and comments, that this year is a great year to get money from the Department of Natural Resources to do urban forestry work. There's a large sum of money that is being routed from the Inflation Reduction Act to the federal and state level in order to promote urban forestry planning and to promote the planting of trees. I think this is a great opportunity for the city to apply for money for an urban forestry plan, a canopy goal, and possibly even arborist services over a shorter period of time until we can establish, the need for having that as part of the work that we do for the city. So that is my intention. The scope of this is kind of modest, but it doesn't mean that we can't come back to the code after we have an urban forestry plan and revise it again. Now I just want to open up for questions or comments and hear what people have to say.
Yeah, I've got a few. So the establishment of the fee in lieu system, what is sort of the prevailing MO for our other jurisdictions around here? Do they do this, or do they still require the developer to provide the replacement trees themselves?
Well, fee in lieu is not necessarily an or tree replacement.
It can be an and?
Yeah, it could be an and. I mean, it's the kind of thing where the best thing to do would be to retain the trees,
yes,
as possible. So that would be the first order of business, is retain as many trees as you can. If you can't retain them, then replant on site. Mm-hmm. And if you can't replant on site, that's where the fee in lieu comes into place, and you can plant them off site. So you're trying to just sort of replace the trees that are removed through the fee in lieu system.
So Depending on the kind of developer we're talking about here, or, what's existing on the lot, there might be a lot of trees. And obviously, we want them to, be replaced on site.
Yeah.
Losing the tree canopy is a big issue in the region, including us. So not only, retaining where trees, where they've been taken from, but is it also, I don't know the code off at the top of my head, where, depending on the size of the tree, will it have to be not just replaced by one tree, but like two new trees for every older, mature tree that's removed?
That's a possible modification to our existing code. I don't believe our existing code is written to take into account the diameter of the existing significant tree and require replacement of more units.
I just think, the larger the tree, obviously, the bigger the canopy that's being lost, and it takes almost a generation for a newly planted tree to even come close to, what was removed. So while the canopy of one new tree isn't going to, be very significant for decades, the more new trees that are planted, you add up the smaller canopies together, sort of an aggregate, helps make up the difference. Obviously, it's not 100% perfect solution, but, it helps kind of cover that cost. The only thing that I think of is that I know right now, I don't want to say we're, giving away the farm, but less trees are being planted on some of these developments than what had existed previously. These lots are being so intensely developed without enough open space to provide that kind of vegetation. So I'm hoping that, some sort of change will also change the way the developers are developing these lots, to keep that in mind, that, hey, we're going to actually have to budget more open space to allow for these type of trees. So it's not just, townhomes surrounded by, an asphalt driveway, and then, we're just going to throw some trees out in the right of way and let the city worry about that, so.
Yeah, I think it depends on the zoning, right? For areas that we want to intensify development, such as the town center, we might be using more fee in lieu.
Yeah.
Right? Because that makes more sense.
Because that type of development
Yeah,
isn't really
that
going
type
to
of
be,
development makes
allow
more
that
sense,
type of
yeah.
open space to allow.
And then other areas of the city, no, because that, there's just a different kind of approach that we'd want to take. So I think it just has to do with how we're intentionally looking at the city and thinking about what it's going to look like in 20 years.
And in terms of incentives for developers to retain the significant trees, can't we just make that code?
We can, but there might be some reasons why we don't want to, because I think that we want to try to make it possible for large areas of the city to redevelop. And if we make it too, depending on the size of the lot, right? It's very difficult for something to be built on some of these smaller lots without removing the trees. It's just the reality of the situation. So I think that it might be more in the city's interest to try to provide more incentives rather than try to put in more restrictive language. But it depends on the zoning of the area and the intention that the city has for that part of the city.
How would that valuation then come up? I guess, because of the first thing, the fee in lieu, you're developing a tree valuation system. How would that valuation apply to any kind of incentives or reductions in fees occur? Because our fees are, I'm sure the developers want a big slice taken out of those fees, but those fees are important as well.
Yeah, I think it has to be done thoughtfully in terms of what benefit would be provided. For example, I can see a pretty direct connection between a large mature tree and reduction of runoff and interception of air pollutants and interception of, so I think that there's a pretty good tight connection there, and I would be willing to forego some capital stormwater fees if it meant retaining more large trees. I think that a lot of this stuff is modeled on what Shoreline is doing, which is they are providing these incentives as a way to, for example, try to retain some larger trees in the frontage improvements where, where they can be utilized by everybody, right? It provides the benefits of trees to more people in the community. So I'd like to look and see how that could be done.
Okay. And then with the landmark trees, I know part of the problem that Seattle has is third-party groups trying to like landmark buildings outside of the city, and the property owner, they're trying, they try and step in and landmark something. If you're landmarking a tree, it would just be the property owner themselves that would be trying to nominate that tree?
Yeah, the property owner would have to nominate the tree as a landmark tree. It wouldn't be something that could be done by an outside party.
Okay. And so I imagine that type of property owner would probably be a long-term property owner who really has no interest in selling or redeveloping. I can't imagine developers wanting to landmark trees as they're about ready to bulldoze everything on the lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an option, and I think it's something that some of the members of the tree code team were really interested in as a way to kind of promote some beautiful things around the city. I guess in other places there's been like a scavenger hunt to find all the landmark trees in your city or in a particular part of the city, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what the motivations would be of people for doing landmark trees, but I think that probably we'd see most of them on public property rather than private property.
I tend to think, when I think of, when I'm over the years having to commute to different parts, in Seattle or whatever, I'm driving through neighborhoods where there's very large, significant trees, over 100 years old that were probably planted right after the first clearing, when the loggers came in, and some of these trees have survived. Some of them, right on the right of way and has totally ruined the sidewalk.
Sure.
But,
Yeah.
I think about those type of streets and, how pleasant it is to drive through them. But I also think that those are, more through type thoroughfares. And of course, terrace is a lot of dead ends and cul-de-sacs. And so you don't have as much through traffic and you don't have as much outside exposure to that tree. People who might live on that block know about the tree, but, without bringing in additional traffic for people to come into that area to see the tree, no one else is probably going to see it. That's not saying that's a reason not to have a nomination process. I'm just, it's a little bit, there isn't as much exposure on our side
Yeah,
streets.
exactly. It may not be as much something, that gets used here as it is in other places.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions from people or?
Mr. Betcher?
Yeah. So I know, according to the timeline you presented, it looks like we're aiming for the end of the year to implement the tree code.
Yes, that's what I would like to do. I have a schedule that I put up and I updated it, recently. I think we can pull this off by the end of November, but that means that's a blue sky kind of
Yeah.
situation.
How does that align? This is this is really important work, and I'm glad you're doing it because this is something I think people have been requesting for a long time. How does that fit in with the time frame for the comprehensive plan?
I think I'm going to look at the planning director to speak to this because I don't really know what the schedule is.
So we have until December of '24 for the comp plan. So we're putting that, we'll talk a little bit later about that, but we're putting that schedule together right now. So we've been following this with Laura in the department, so I think we'll be just fine. That we're focusing on getting this done, and then that gives us time for what we're going to be doing next year for adoption of the comp plan and starting that process in the fall. You guys will be seeing it throughout, but we will have other things that come up, and one of them is trees. So I think
Okay.
it's timely in what we're trying to do.
Good, yeah, because I know one of the things that I think we should be addressing in, all of our various documents is urban heat island effect. And that's something I see addressed in maybe warmer places. Like I was an architect in Florida for a while, and they had like minimum canopy coverage requirements for parking lots and things like that. And so, especially as we develop and intensify, that's going to start having more of an impact on how hot it gets and how much hotter we are than the surrounding areas. And, over the past several years, we've been having a lot more of these extreme heat events. And so managing and planning our urban canopy and the tree ordinance, of which is a part, is going to be very important in establishing targets and developing strategies for how we reduce that, especially in some of our more intensely developed areas like town center, where things in the right-of-way and parks are going to have a lot more of an importance than managing trees on individual sites. Is the scope of the tree ordinance primarily for private property, or are we also looking at it applying to public property as well?
Applying heat island?
Just things like tree removal, the process of replacing trees.
Yes, okay, yes, for public property as well. I think the primary loss of trees occurs, of course, when redevelopment comes in and, these tiny, houses, small houses on big lots with lots of trees become multiple lots together and very, smaller trees replacing them. So, but I do think that on public property as well, we need to have a much more comprehensive street tree program. And that work's already begun. We're going to have over 100 street trees planted, thanks to a couple of grants from the DNR in this fall.
I almost got one, but then my wife was like, I don't want a tree in the right-of-way. And I do, but we don't quite know where our driveway is going to go at the end of the day. So, but I think that's that, and also reducing the amount of pavement, which is outside of the tree scope, but all these things kind of need to be aligned to look at sort of this climate management for these more extreme events we have. I imagine that's probably not the entire scope of the tree ordinance, but if there are parts of that, I'd be interested to see, how that can be developed. I don't know if minimum shade coverage of paved areas, or incentives where if a tree is removed from public land, and what I'm thinking of is if there's some forest management done, for example, in Veterans Park, where some of the weed trees are removed, does that wind up creating a tree somewhere else in the city? Does that also apply to public projects? And then I guess my last question is, there's talk of, you mentioned arborists and things like that. I know Forterra did a study a while back of our urban forest canopy in Terrace Creek Park and also in Veterans Park, and found that while we have some pretty good coverage of forest canopy, a lot of it is dominated by invasive species and things like that. Are there provisions in this? You mentioned weed trees and a prohibited list of plants and things like that. Is that a future resourcing that you're looking for managing the tree canopy and the quality of tree canopy on public lands, or would that be a different thing?
Yeah, I mean, currently our code specifies about 5 tree species that are not desirable. They're black cottonwoods that tend to be very brittle and fall on people's cars and things like that. That's an example. But the science of trees is always changing, and so instead of having it in the code, these species, then I think it's much better to refer to a prohibited tree list that means that the trees that get planted are suitable for where they're going to go, and that they're a long-term asset for both the property and for the city.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And it sounds like we're kind of at the beginning of this process, and there's some more outreach to do. Will you be coming back to us again, and are there places that would be valuable for us to show up?
Yes, I will be coming back to you again with some draft ordinance language. This is the part where I'm interested just to kind of understand what the commission is thinking about in terms of trees, and I want to make sure that we have a comprehensive approach before we start drafting the ordinances. But we will be coming back to you, and that's when, we'll be getting additional insight. It's going to be quite a difficult process to go from these are some general ideas to actually writing the code. And so I anticipate that that's where you guys could provide quite a bit of value.
Okay, great. I think that's all the questions I had. Thank you so much.
Sure. Are there any questions from people virtually?
Is there, well, I got a few more questions, so let me.
Okay. I don't want to take up all the time.
No,
I'm
so-
a hardworking city manager, city.
Kind of going back to the fee in lieu, it's saying here to replace or maintain trees. Are we talking about replacing and maintaining trees just in like the public right of way, like public trees? Or?
Yes, those are the only trees we
Okay.
have jurisdiction over and responsibility for.
Will part of this be, like, I know a lot of jurisdictions have like a free tree program, where you can sign up and, the city provides you basically a street tree.
We have that.
So-
Yes, we do.
So would that fund that as well?
Yes, it could fund. I mean, right now it's grant funded, but I've been finding that it's quite difficult to get money for that. So that would be, I think, a good use of it, right? Because you'd be removing trees, but planting trees with, with the money that you gathered for those trees that were removed.
I know one of the things that I've been pushing for years was increasing the planting strip width to allow for a better, the trees to grow better.
Sure.
Because you just see the tree being constrained by, a little narrow
Yeah.
strip of grass, increase the width and you got a better looking tree. With city capital projects though, where there's roadway work, where, maybe the right of way width is changing, or not necessarily, the road width is changing, the right of way width stays the same. That creates the opportunity to add a planting strip and street tree. That would come from the funding for that capital project though, that wouldn't.
Typically.
That would be separate from.
Typically, but it could be something that could be put toward that,
Okay.
Because I think that you want to keep the money that you collect for fee in lieu pretty tightly tied to tree replacement, right? And so that would be, I would say that it could be possible that a capital project could draw from the tree fund for that portion of the project.
Normally, like without this, right now, though, with our current code, that capital improvement would still have to require those street trees anyway.
Yes, as part of the frontage improvement.
Okay.
Correct.
So I guess what I'm kind of getting at is that I would hate to see our capital projects cannibalizing the in lieu fee when they're already being paid through the funding of the capital project itself.
That wouldn't be the intent. I mean, it would.
Let that continue.
Correct.
Don't try and, stick your hand in somebody else's cookie jar.
Absolutely. It would be just like a private or public development. I mean, that if there's a requirement for street trees, there's a requirement for street trees. This money is intended, I believe, for other things besides paying for something that's already a requirement, right? So.
And it would still be on the developer to include those new street trees in front of their development.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, and this is why it's good to talk about these sort of things, because sometimes the subtleties of this escape me, and so that's why it's good to kind of work through them like, oh, okay, well, wait a minute, actually, maybe we want to spend this money on something that isn't funded, So we'll get to the point where we have code that has thought through all these kind of issues. And I think that the nice thing is that there's a lot of good examples in other cities around here. As part of the preparation for revising the code, we looked at what Linwood, Edmonds, Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, Briar, and Kirkland are doing. And that was very educational in terms of what do they use their tree fund. They all have tree funds. They all use them for slightly different purposes. Yeah.
So I had a quick question. So who's the tree board? What is that made up of?
It's actually the RPAC. It's RPAC, but
Oh,
RPAC
okay.
is also the tree board.
Okay, because I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm not familiar with this tree board.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
is
you're like,
this?
wait a minute, what's
I've
this
not
one?
heard of this, and
No, it's-
usually I'm the one advocating for street trees on the planning commission. So.
Right, I mean, to be a Street Tree USA, a Tree City USA, you have to have a tree board. And so the tree board is also RPAC. So, they talk, and part of what they talk about at meetings is trees.
Okay, and then there's just an incident or interested resident, so just sort of a random citizen who's interested in this.
She's a very strong advocate for trees. And so she wanted to participate, and I thought that was great to have somebody who is just a member of the community. And I should say, RPAC is the Recreation and Parks and Advisory Committee. I'm sure you know that, but I'm not sure if everybody on the call does.
And then who's the developer?
Developer is a person I've worked with from Sierra Construction. He's their environmental person. And
Oh, okay.
He's been super helpful and really had some great ideas, and also able to provide a different perspective on what it's like to, work under different kinds of regulations and how things are changing in other places.
And I've seen their signage and, their tarps on fences and stuff. They tend to do larger scale projects, right?
They do.
Okay.
Yeah, I did reach out to the Master Builders Association to ask them if there was anybody who would be willing to work with us. And especially, I was looking for somebody who is doing townhome development, but I think people were just too busy to do this.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate the contribution of,
And in a way, it's great that there is from the development side, it's somebody who deals with the more environmental issues.
yeah.
I would hate to see developers are just, especially the ones who just focus on townhomes, just looking to sort of game the system.
I don't
for
think that's
themselves.
what's going on. I think that we're really getting a good rounded perspective on how this would be implemented. And especially, I think it's good to have the voice of, the development community at the table. Yeah.
Okay. One last chance. Any other
Yeah.
questions?
No, those were great. I have those questions.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And I'll see you in a few months, maybe, hopefully, only a couple months. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right. Item number 6, proposed amendments to engineering standards. Looks like complete document and appendices.
Good evening. We finally have a full draft of our document. Should I put it on? I don't know if I need to put it on here. It's so big and long. Oh, you're the best. Oh, nice. Okay, so probably the biggest addition this round is I've included all the appendices this time. So I thought I would run through those really quick because I heard a couple questions during Laura's presentation that might be of interest. All right. All right, so the different appendices that we've included in this, I'm just going to zoom right down to there. So when it comes to documents like this, there's so many acronyms and definitions, we wanted to make sure that we had a comprehensive list of that. And again, I want to thank my colleagues at the City of Shoreline for putting most of these together. Unless anybody has any questions about some of them, I'm just going to blow through this and get to Appendix B. Well, here's definitions. And we have quite a list of those, and you might take some time to look through those to see if there's any comments or questions on those and that I can answer at a later date.
And the highlighted sections are ones that are areas that still need to be corrected?
Yes. So some of the future tasks we have is to come back with code amendments. And so I've highlighted the areas where we'll need to link the new codes to this document, but we haven't created them yet, so. There's a lot of definitions. All right, so when it comes to Appendix B is survey criteria. So we get all of our projects, there's some survey work done. And so it's good to have a list of all the items that need to be in a survey. It's been codified here so that when we get survey information for our projects or when we do our own survey, they know what items to include on the base maps there. So if there's any questions on survey data, just let me know. Again, most of this is pretty standard. I don't think there's any surprises in that. The stormwater report guidelines. So we wanted to make sure we had a place where people could kind of pull out a lot of the information when it comes to a stormwater report. Stormwater reports are required for all of our developments of a certain size. And so we wanted to make sure that we have all the information that they're going to need to include on here, and you know, anything that would help them develop a good quality report. It's all contained in here. The same thing with geotech reports. So geotechnical reports are included or a requirement for a lot of our developments and large projects. So again, we wanted to make sure that the reports are hitting all the elements that we need them to include in the report. And so this, again, is a lot of the required information that they'll need to include when they do a geotech analysis. This is helping us meet our goal of having a lot of the information that people need to do development in the city and large projects contained in one document as much as possible. All right. Appendix E, Transportation Impact Analysis. So again, some of the larger projects are going to have to produce a traffic impact analysis report. And our current code says that anybody that generates 10 or more PM peak hour trips is going to have to do one of these reports. So again, this is an attempt here to make sure that the reports include all the information they need to have to standardize the format and make it as useful as possible.
I have the voice of our former planning commissioner, Vic Sood, screaming in my ear right now, because every time something like this came up, he would always rail against the current service levels and how development was going to change it, and how it seemed ridiculous to say that that new development isn't going to make the service levels worse.
Well, but he's got a valid point. The every time we get more trips on the road, the service level declines a little bit. On a separate note, along with the comp plan that we're kicking off, we're also looking into updating our transportation master plan as one of the elements of the comp plan, and producing a new citywide traffic model that can not only give us a new snapshot of the current level of service out there, but it's going to give us an opportunity to decide if those level of service measurements are adequate. Do we need to change them at all? I mean, this is a good discussion point. And it'll feed into some of the other information that we can derive out of the traffic model, like updating our traffic impact fees and issues like that.
I'm sure you'd be happy to hear that.
Just, this might be a bit of a tangent. Does that just look at vehicular traffic, or is that also looking at more of a multimodal transportation levels of impact, level of service impact?
We'll look multimodal levels of transportation. That's where a lot of the analysis and that's the current state of transportation analysis. It can't be vehicle centric. You have to consider all the modes. And, we're not building our streets with more capacity for cars necessarily, but we are building them for more bikes and peds. And so we want to make sure that's all contained in our new transportation plan to make sure it's all addressed, because it's vital in order to continue to get denser that we have the flexibility for all these modes.
That's great. I'm glad we're modernizing the way we're looking at this.
So Appendix F is the street matrix, and this is the one appendix that's going to need the most work. So
One page.
yeah, it's only one page right now, but it will be growing. So our goal, our intent with the street matrix is to go through all the arterials in the city and actually determine, have a plan for the curb-to-curb width, the planning area, amenity zone width, and the sidewalk width. Right now, we have some generic cross-sections in our standards, and every time a new development comes in, we have to relook at the street and decide where we want to place the face of curb and how wide are the sidewalks. We're redoing the same work over and over again. And if we have a master plan of how wide the roadway will be for the entire length, then we start having a more consistent approach as infill development happens. And, we don't have to keep recreating the wheel every time a developer comes in and says, how much frontage do I have to build and where's the curb need to be? So this is I think a really important tool that we'll have in there. At this point, we still haven't fleshed that out, but we're going to keep adding the streets to the document as this document grows over time. So we started off with just a generic for the local streets, and then we'll start adding in some more of the arterial streets. Now, as a separate piece of this, we'll also be rolling in the street design standards for town center, because we've defined a lot of those in the code already. So we want to make sure that having to have somebody interpret the code, it can all be, again, found in one place. And keep the design details like that in this document, and then the town center design look and feel stuff in the code. So, it's a work in progress, but there's a placeholder for it now.
Yeah, I like this. It seems like it's giving you a pretty powerful tool to set some targets here for things.
That's the intent.
Yeah. Are there, I know in some of the other streets, we've got things like, target speed limits, or maybe target, I know some of our criteria are like, level of service for pedestrians and things like that. Is there an opportunity to put some targets for things like that in this matrix as well? This is kind of a physical thing, but one thing that I've heard, and you probably know better than me because you're an actual engineer, but the widths of the street and the design of the street can impact the speed of the traffic on that street. So if you've got these long straight streets with these wide lanes and no way of registering that, oh, this is actually a street in a residential neighborhood, people might wind up naturally driving much faster on the street than they do. So you see that in 48th and 56th and some of these others kind of streets in the middle of the parks that don't really have a lot of intersections. are there opportunities to put sort of design criteria in this matrix to say, okay, this is like a 20-mile-an-hour street, this is like a 30-mile-an-hour street with like, you know, a target level of like comfort for bicyclists who aren't necessarily very comfortable on bicycles? Like, is that the place for this, or is that some other place?
Yes and no. This is definitely the place where we can use the physical features that will help narrow the lanes and slow the traffic, just like you said. For the design speeds and those type of intent, I think that's going to be something we'll more find in the transportation master plan versus in here. So this will be, if we decide this is what we want to do, here's how we'll build it.
Okay.
So that's how the two documents will interact.
Cool. And I think in the presentation we just heard on the tree canopy coverage, and this might be jumping ahead to the next section, and maybe some of what Commissioner Bautista mentioned in terms of like planting strips wide enough for trees and things like that. I'd also be interested in seeing things like, you know, target tree canopy covers for streets and things like that. Would it live in this table, or would that be more the next section?
That would be probably in the next section here. We have a whole section on approved street trees. Some of the trees we don't like will all be in here. So it's part of, yes, it will be part of that. And when it comes to the width of the planting strip, that's definitely going to be part of this section. And we'll need to decide as a city, you know, what's the right number for that? You know, because with a 5-foot planting strip, but amended soils or structural soils underneath, you can actually improve the viability of a tree, and you get the benefit of both worlds. You know, so what's the sweet spot on that? You know, we haven't decided yet, but that is something that we'll be discussing, and there'll be more discussion on it. What's the appropriate width of the amenity zone? A wider amenity zone planting strip has other benefits of making it more enjoyable to walk as you're further away from traffic, just like parked cars also provide that buffer. So, you know, there's lots of trade-offs that can help in the end, provide us with a nice, livable, walkable city. So,
Sort of getting back to your traffic calming comment, this was several years ago now. It predates the last town center update even. But the Planning Commission had discussions about, you know, traffic calming and where we would want to see, you know, those bike lanes. And it was brought up that, you know, kind of marking 48th and 58th as, you know, prioritize the bike lanes there, separate them from, you know, kind of the higher volume traffic. That's kind of in a quicker, I want to get to where I'm going. Put them more on, you know, I don't want to sort of degrade them and say just the side streets, but, you know, they're long thoroughfares. You know, we don't have too many of those in the city, but tag those thoroughfares as, you know, traffic calming, bike lanes, get them separated from the hazards of 56th and 44th, where there are people, you know, who drive and, you know, aren't as concerned about, you know, the other people around them, you know, with other modes of travel. There was some interest in that, but, you know, as of many things that we talk about and discuss and say, hey, let's work on that, it kind of got pushed to the side because something was on fire, we had to put it out, and then we never really came back to that. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's still a worthwhile idea. Obviously, it would need to change, you know, with you know, the town center, how it interacts with that, you know, that might be a little bit different now than, say, it was a decade ago, but I think that's still worth pursuing.
I think that's a valuable, like, you know, that's several planning commission meetings worth of discussion, I think.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, I think that's a good, and I think this tool is going to help us, like, help that, you know, discussion along. So I think this is going to be really useful. So I'm glad this is in there.
all right, let's go to the next section, and I believe this is our street tree list. So here we've kind of gone through for our city what are recommended medium trees, medium to large, or large trees. And I think we even have small trees, and evergreen where it's appropriate, and then we have the prohibited trees. So we've tried to at least start to identify all the trees that we do and don't want on our streets.
Quick question. Okay, yeah, sorry, you do have the minimum planting. Never mind.
I'm sure there are some that we could add or subtract. That's something that we're hoping to get more feedback on as we go through this. But we took our best shot at what would make sense right at the moment, and we know that it'll be fine-tuned over the years. So.
Does minimum planting strip width correspond to the full spread, or do you need wider planting strip width to get the full size of the tree?
Yeah, I think we still need to fill that part out. I think if we have 5 feet, well, these are evergreen trees, but we normally don't use evergreen trees, in amenity zones.
Yeah.
So these would be evergreen trees that are behind the sidewalk or in some other areas. So when it comes to the regular trees that we do plant, we've got some recommended minimum amenity zone width there. So depending on what you have out there, if you have a 4-foot amenity zone already, here's a list of trees you could get. Mm-hmm. If you wanted some larger trees, you can see they're 5, and even the medium ones, this Acer rubrum, it needs a 6. So there's been some thought into what we would need for each one of these different trees, and we have a wide range of them at the moment. And again, we can always add more.
Okay, so if I plant an Acer rubrum in a 6-foot wide planting strip, would I get a 20-foot spread?
I believe that's what this is saying. So.
I brought it up recently, at least with the several meetings back, the idea of when we were going through the town center, sort of the add-ons, the lamp posts, the benches, et cetera, would have a theme. And the idea is that each neighborhood would have kind of a distinctive theme to make it look. Part of those discussions in the original town center plan where this idea first came up, back in 2007, was also trees, different neighborhoods, especially with the street trees. Certain species, would be a focus in certain neighborhoods to give that, to have the foliage be uniquely distinctive for that neighborhood as well. Obviously, you want a mix of trees, but I still think that idea of having, the different neighborhoods look as unique as possible is still worthwhile. Individual character and, trees are a part of that. I don't want to say restrict certain trees to only certain neighborhoods, but I think as a city, since it's the prime, a lot of the right-of-way street trees, the city's the one's going to be doing that. Maybe, think about that and, have a game plan, for that. If there's, buy-in for that, if people agree or.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is also a really helpful tool in terms of planning things. Like, in my mind, this is sort of the urban heat island effect, right? Like, this is what you use to sort of help you calculate that. Like, if you're in a neighborhood with taller buildings closer to the street, you might want less tree canopy coverage, but more tree canopy height. And so that way you're shading the sides of the building a little bit better and reducing the solar gain on those. So I think this kind of document here starts to set up those kind of calculations and maybe talks to what you're talking about a little bit, where you're planning, you're targeting certain criteria for certain kinds of streets. And it's a little less like, I think you're talking more about like character. Like when I grew up in a subdivision in Florida, one kind of street had oak trees and the other kind of street had palm trees, right? Like, and they were just all around. Yeah. So that's like more of a character thing, but I think this also is like, has a functional like purpose as well. So those things can be matched in pretty good ways, I think. I like this tool.
Obviously, the type of street trees that we would see in the town center are going to be different, like say, in less intense developed arterials. One of the other things, again, going back several years that, we talked about, and I know we talked about because I'm the one who brought it up, was the goal of, and again, it was the funding, where's the money going to come from? But the idea of especially creating these thoroughfares, like the 44th, the 58th, the 60, 56, 68, or 58th, even 66, create kind of like a tree-lined boulevard, really something unique and distinctive. And, in some areas where there's going to be, multi-story mixed use, you're not going to have a tree with a huge widespread, but, kind of more of those open expanses, maybe go with a tree that has a wider canopy, on either side. Pie in the sky was running right down the middle too, but yeah, I know utilities go down the street. That's not, that may not necessarily be a good idea, but, I think about the potential of having tree-lined, tree-focused boulevards. I just think of 17th, north of 45th in the U District, Greek Row. Just planning 100 and some years ago to have a huge planting strip going down the middle of the street, two small streets, kind of on either side of that, plus not so wide planting strips on bookending it. But what that allowed in terms of, tree growth and visual distinctiveness. Now, I know that took, you got to plan that out before you actually have the city grow up around you. But the kind of potential that is there with, that we can, maybe reverse engineer, not necessarily to that scale, but it'd be nice to have something, something that we could point to and say, hey, that's.
The risk of going off on a tangent, I'm always kind of surprised that we've got these like big wide turn lanes that don't really turn into anything. Like the example I'm thinking of is like between Primera and kind of the top of hill on 220th, but like there are other examples where you just kind of have this extra pavement. 236 kind of between 48th and 44th as well. Like I think there's just like this turn lane that doesn't really turn anywhere, and like it must cost some money to pave that every time we repave it. Like, is that a cost savings when we depave?
Well, so that's kind of a pet peeve of mine, and because it predates you. Those used to be 2-lane roads, or 2 lanes each direction. There were several planning commissioners who did not want to see that changed, me included. But, it was changed, and I sit there because I drive down those roads every day, and I'm like, it's literally a turn lane for a half a mile with nowhere to turn. It seems kind of ridiculous, but no, yeah, there used to be 2 lanes in each direction.
Yeah, I think, there could be some potential for cost savings in de-paving some of these because we don't have to keep maintaining that pavement, but that's just my guess. It's not an informed opinion, so.
All right. We'll skip ahead here. Next, we're looking at our record drawings. This is something that we're trying to put a little more teeth behind because our record drawings, COVID taught us a lot of good lessons, and one of those is maybe to try to get away from so much of the paper copies and more electronic and Mylars. I don't think we need Mylars anymore. So this is where we're starting to codify what our record drawing requirements are going to be, especially for somebody who's doing a project in here. We're going to continue to update this as we update our process and our file formats for what we're eventually going to want to save all of our final drawings in. So, street lighting levels criteria. So we don't really have street lighting level criteria, so we wanted to make sure we included something like that. This is our first, stab at it here, basically replicating what they were doing in Shoreline. This may generate some more comments as we decide what's the appropriate lighting level that we want in town. I know that the lighting designs, the lighting standards for town center, we're going to take another look at those because some of the early incorporations of what we've seen from that has been extremely bright. And we need to find kind of a happy medium, maybe reducing some of the poles so we can squeeze in a few more trees and reduce the lighting levels to something closer to these targets.
Is there a way to retrofit what's existing out there, like just swap out the actual hardware? Because I'm assuming it's all the new stuff's LED.
It is, and actually the poles that we've got specified and installed in the field have dimming features on them.
Oh, so we can just dim those.
So we can dim those, we can control that, but, you know, usually when somebody puts them in, they crank them up to high and then leave them there, because LEDs will eventually fade over time, so there's a light loss factor that goes into that. You know, but it's for us to come out there and continually tweak the light level on that, you know, it's a resource issue. And on 236, for example, I think there's a big light pole, a street light pole, and then a ped light pole, and then a ped light pole, and then another street light pole. There's like a pole every 30 feet. We don't need that
Will you
many.
take into consideration right now, you know, what street trees are there, are brand new and, you know, aren't fully mature, and how the lighting will change as the trees grow?
The lighting models, the analysis tools, they factor in trees.
Okay.
You know, and plus if we use a staggered pattern, staggered across the street, you'll still be able to light up the roadway to meet our safety requirements for the roadway. The ped scale lighting is aimed out over the sidewalk, so we can still have that. It's just that we won't need to light it up as bright as it is currently being shown. And there's a measure called uniformity, which is kind of the brightness compared to the dimmest compared to the brightness again. You want a certain level of uniformity so that as you go down the street too. And you'll see those measures on this table. There's uniformity and there's the minimum maintained foot candles at the on the surface.
When the city first started using LED streetlights, they had some test areas where they tried different models that had sort of a different color brightness, you know, brightness and color. And because they were brand new and you didn't really see them everywhere. I remember hitting a neighborhood where they were doing it. I was like, whoa, this is different. Did you guys retain that data, and will you kind of refer to that as well when you're making these decisions?
I'm not sure if we still have that data, okay. But what we normally do is we'll research it, because if I can't find our data, there's been a lot of research, and you know, everybody's starting to develop their own desire for what these lighting levels would be and the different colors. So we would, you know, do a little bit of canvassing and research and try to figure out what would be a good option for our city, and you know, offer up a couple choices.
Because I think part of that experiment was also public input. You know, people saying, hey, I like this, or I don't like this, or, you know, it's so new. I mean, this was a while ago now, that it was just any of the test areas look completely different to what we were used to. You know, the sodium phosphorus for, you know, lights, the LED hues were just completely different, and, you know, some work better than others. But I think now, yeah, it was over a decade ago, so I think you know, technology and the use of it has become more prevalent, that maybe some of those early models that the city might have tested don't even exist anymore, and just it's been agreed, it's like, yeah, nobody really liked that, and this is the preferred pretty much for.
Some of the current technology has auto dimming also, so that's another feature that we could, you know, roll into our standard.
So it's not super bright, like say when dusk first starts, but as it gets later in the evening, it gets a little brighter and brighter, and then as the sun comes up, it gets dimmer and dimmer.
Right. In a commercial area, you may not need the light to be as so bright if the businesses are all lit up.
Yeah.
And then when they shut down, then the lighting it's both a energy saver and it helps maintain a consistent lighting level.
I know I missed last week where we talked about these standards, and I apologize, I was very sick at the time. I have a couple of questions about this table and just kind of the lighting section in general. I know you back up in the standards, there's a 3,000 Kelvin lighting temperature standard. I know the lights that we have kind of around my house and some of the streets, I know there's been research on interrupting circadian rhythms and the color temperature of the ambient lighting that you have. Like, if you have your iPhone, like it'll like warm up basically as night comes. And the lights have always kind of struck me as a little bit cool for circadian purposes. What does a 3,000 Kelvin light look like? Is that our current standard? Is that warmer than our current standard?
I couldn't tell you right now.
Yeah. I would think there might be a difference between commercial and residential areas, or maybe that's, however you divide this, but in areas where circadian rhythm is affected, you might want a warmer temperature. So I don't know if that varies by street, just establishing kind of a maximum color temperature. The other question I have is in glare and light pollution. The light that's on my street is like this big bright bulb, and so it might send whatever illumination to the surface of the street that is legally required, but because you've got this big bright thing like shining 35 feet in the air, like it's actually very hard to see people on the street. And in other places where I've seen this, like, sometimes light actually gets shot out because it's like shining in someone's backyard, and like it's just very bright. And maybe you've discussed this already, or maybe it's in the standard already, but light standards for glare and light shedding on neighboring properties or into the eyes of the drivers, I think would be something valuable to look at as well. I know they make light fixtures that are supposed to reduce those kind of things. They might put like a little guy on the back or something, but I don't know if that's already addressed or not.
I'm not sure how, to what extent that's addressed. You're correct that there are visors and programmable lenses and things that we can do with fixtures to help target them to remain on the street and not lighting up private property. We talked about that as part of our light standards for town center, because as we get 6 to 12 story buildings, the light poles will be close to these, and so we have to have some way to be able to control how much light could spill into the private property. So it's something that we are aware of, and we want to make sure we have something in place to help control that, because some people they don't like the extra light or the glare onto their property, and we need to have some mechanism to be able to control that as best we can.
Yeah. That's something else I could see being added to a table like this, where it's sort of a contextual thing, where maybe it's not this addition to the table, but like, because it sounds like there's still some work that needs to be done to kind of develop that a little bit further in town center and some things like that. But as that gets added to, I think things like color temperature and light pollution are two items that might want to vary a little bit. And maybe it's not called light pollution, maybe it's called glare or something like that, excess illumination or something. But I could see that being added to a table like this as well. And whatever that looks like as those standards are developed.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a light post in my cul-de-sac that this time of year is fine because all my foliage is grown in and it blocks my window. But in the wintertime, it's bright. So, yeah. But I don't know what you could do about it. We don't have that much radius in our little cul-de-sac.
Yeah, I think if I remember right from architecture days, you can like lower the height of the light. You can put some, like they sell fixtures that like have a directivity of the beam of the light and things like that. But it takes some design.
There's a visor or a shield that you can attach to a lot of the common light fixtures out there.
Okay, good to know.
We'll move on. Our Appendix J is just some of the information you have to put on a traffic control plan when you submit it. We get traffic control plans that are submitted to us for approval for any work that closes down a street or a sidewalk in the city. So we want to make sure that when they're submitting the plans that they have enough information on the plans in order to approve it, you know, as is or with corrections without having to go back and forth all the time. This also gives them some of the base hours, the work hours that are pretty normal, avoiding the peak hours, things like maintaining 11-foot lanes when they narrow it down the street. Just some of the basic criteria that we don't have to keep telling them every single time.
Does the city require professionally drawn up traffic control plans, or are they kind of do you get like a mixed bag where somebody will try, like they're required to say, submit like a site plan and a traffic control plan, and they try and combine the two documents into one and say, here, it's all on this?
We get all kinds. Sometimes we'll get a Google map with some signs posted on it. It depends on how intricate the site is, you know. Sometimes if it's just kind of a detour and a road closure, you know, that would be enough. If you've got a road with turn lanes and driveways that we're trying to maintain, sometimes we need something a little more detailed. So it kind of depends on the situation. But if they turn them in, this is kind of the information that we would like to have on them.
I know for Seattle, they don't require traffic control plans in every instance, but if it's on arterials or in hub zones, then it's absolutely mandatory. And usually, you know, the bigger, like the utilities and, you know, the bigger developers, they're old hands at this, and they just contract that out. It's professionally done. You look at it, and it's like, okay, yeah, you've listed all of our requirements on there. There's even the signage icons, and, you know, it's got everything going on. But then you get somebody who just happens to be in one of those problem areas, the arterial or the hub, but they're just a standalone person, and, you know, what they're trying to submit is like, yeah, that doesn't have enough information on it.
Well, we try to be as flexible as we can. If I can make a few corrections on there and still approve it, I'll do that, because it just takes a lot of time and effort to keep sending it back for a resubmittal. So I usually try to find as many ways as I can without redrawing the whole plan. You know, so, but it depends on, again, the situation.
Situation, location,
Yep.
especially what the traffic impact would be.
Yep.
With not only automobiles, but especially around here now with probably more pedestrian traffic going to the future light rail station, how they're impacted as well.
Oh, pedestrian detours and ADA compliance through a work zone is required. So I mean, it's something that we've been enforcing more and more on our traffic control plans. Up here, I've also added some sections for when we require police officers to control a signalized intersection. We didn't have a whole lot of definition about where they would be required. Usually, at a minimum, you have to use a uniformed police officer when you countermand a traffic control device. So if we're changing the way the traffic flows through a signal, then you need a police officer. I've kind of enlarged this a little bit, that if your work zone is within 100 feet of the traffic signal, you still need one, because there always seems to be at some point where either traffic backs up or something happens. It's just better to have the police officer out there from the start. So, And then I added some language in here about bus stops and bus route impacts. I mean, it's kind of understood, but we need to, in our effort to make it as clear and easy as possible, we're going to add in the appropriate contacts for that and contact information for all the transit agencies, including the schools.
Do you have any kind of call out for haul routes? Because I know that's something that we'll have on our traffic control plans, like if there's like a haul route, it's not in my unit, but they're somewhere in the department. If it affects a haul, like a freight route, then there has to be a separate coordination or, another level of review and check, because if you're affecting the traffic on a transport, a haul route, that's a big deal.
Well,
I know we don't have a lot here, but, there are designated arterials, for, semi-traffic.
we do require traffic control haul route plans, and we're going to need those more and more as we start to get large development in town center. When somebody's rebuilding a whole block, they're going to need an area to lay down their equipment and their materials. They're going to have to haul spoils in and out of the excavation. So, yeah, we're going to require truck routes. They can't use 58th. 58th pavement isn't thick enough to support bus or truck traffic. So we're going to need to make sure the approved route keeps them on 56, which is our one of our few truck routes in the city. So
Yeah, haul route's a different department, but construction staging, that would be mine.
yeah.
I would see those applications and see the horrible right-of-way impact plans and the.
It's an important consideration, both during construction and then, if a building has commercial and they get truck deliveries, just knowing how those trucks are going to utilize the loading docks in the future, you have to design your approaches for the loading docks once it's all said and done. So,
One of the reasons why SDOT had to create hub coordination was the fact that so much development would be happening in such a small localized area that it was just causing too much of a headache for the citizens. Being that we're going to see a lot of activity in the town center area with, the light rail coming in, we've already seen some of it, it's just going to get more intense. Does the city have a plan to sort of coordinate that development? So, being able to say it's kind of phases like, okay, developer number one, you came to us first, here's your window of time. Developer number two, you're too close to this. There's going to be too much impacts. If both of you guys are going at the same time, you're going to have to wait, until a certain phase of their construction before you can start. Or has there been any kind of thought of that for, the town center? Or do you think that just because of the size of it, it isn't necessary?
well, we've thought about it. We actually had a discussion the other day about what constitutes temporary. Is it, for me, it's up to a year. So you can put up a construction fence and call it temporary for a year, or you can close off a sidewalk on one side of the street temporary. Some of these construction projects can stretch out for years. So is it really temporary? We're trying to, I think, settle on what's a good definition for temporary in those situations. And, be it a year or 6 months or whatever, it's going to make a difference in what we would approve for when they do begin construction. And talking about how they're going to coordinate and usually it'll be first come, first serve on that. But it's definitely something that we know is going to come up, and we're going to address it as it happens, I think, at this point. But, just knowing that we've got kind of a strategy for when it does happen, I think is where we are right now.
Usually what kind of caused this in Seattle was the fact that you would have the sidewalk closed, like a whole block's worth of sidewalk closed, and then, so you'd have to cross the street one block, and then the next block you'd have to cross back the other, and then in some cases it was closed on both sides of the street on the same block, which really ruffled a lot of feathers. So now, they created that extra layer of coordination. I know that the sidewalks were closed more for safety and sometimes it was staging, but usually it was safety. I'm not sure how, when you're digging a pit for the entire block, there is no construction staging there. It's just, you're digging the pit until,
Right.
and then, everything's being trucked in as it's needed. I can envision, if we see the development happen the way we want it to happen, there might be some of those competing interests with, developers trying to do things too close together where it might cause an adverse impact.
And I don't know if it's in this edition, but our intent is to have some more language about covered sidewalks, just for kind of the same reason. If we have to start closing sidewalks for more than 6 months or so, then I think that we should have them, keep them open and use protective coverings of some sort. So that will be addressed.
Yeah. I know Seattle has that. That's one of the options for one of their
For these,
right-of-way construction permits.
for these longer term detours, do you look at the impact to, I guess, transit time, for lack of a better word, if it's sort of longer? It sounds like we can make it an approved plan, but if it's like, like, for example, the townhouses that are on 56, just south of 228th, like they kind of closed the middle of the sidewalk for like however long they were being built, like several months, and then you had to like detour and like go all the way up and around, or just like I did, walk in the street, or at the transit center, like they did the thing where instead of having a sidewalk directly from one of the bus bays to the other bus bays, you had to like cross like two intersections 3 times each, and I almost missed a bus the other day, and like it wasn't signed. So some of these things can have some pretty significant impacts to travel time, especially in modes that can't go from 0 to 60 in like 10 seconds. Is that a factor that we look at when we review these transportation plans, and also for the length of time as well?
It is, and it's going to be more critical as things move on and the development gets a lot denser. So definitely need to make sure that they've got both an ADA accessible route and a route that's not going to be so circuitous that it causes people to jaywalk or do something unsafe. So that's our bottom line, is we want to make it accessible, and we want to make sure people aren't, we're not kind of encouraging people to do something that we don't want them to.
Is that something that we have published standards for, or is that more of like a judgment call by the department?
Right, it's not published right at the moment, but I think in our traffic control plan, and I'll look through there, that's some of the criteria that we're telling them that they have to follow is the accessible route. And I don't know if we actually say how many accesses, but that's part of our if it's not in here, it'll be a future amendment to address that.
Great.
Yeah. Let's see, our Appendix K is our stormwater facility planting list. This is another list that I expect could grow as, I guess as there's more research about what works well and what doesn't. But we wanted to make sure that we started to capture this all in one area. So we've got a list of all the approved plantings so far.
Should have kept Laura around for this.
Appendix L is going to be our revised details and specifications. So the current standard details all of them are being revised. And so what I've done here is I started writing down or capturing what all the standard details are that we're currently planning to include. Some of them are new. All the town center centric details are going to be grouped together in a section at the end of it. Our current standards kind of have town center standards mixed throughout the whole thing, which makes it appear that they apply to the whole city. And there's some standards and details that only apply to town center. So for that neighborhood, that area, we'll have a separate section of standards, and then the rest of this will be citywide details. But we've identified a few of them that we didn't have that we want to include, a few of them that are in there that we don't really want to have anymore. We'll retire them. And I think there's going to be even more than what I've listed in this document. But as we finish our revisions of this round of them, we'll update this as needed. So
I think as we start working on our sub areas, there may be a desire to adopt some of the town center standards for the sub areas as well that are going to see more intense development in the, not in the very near term, but, kind of further out, there are already commercial centers in our city, and, that are going to sort of focus more of that growth and development too. So I could see us wanting to expand some of the town center.
Yeah, I agree. I see that too, especially if we wanted to do any type of branding in our neighborhoods. We would probably want to have some either their own details, or we would expand these to say these apply in multiple neighborhoods. So, but that makes sense, and there's room to expand it in here to do that.
And I remember a presentation that staff gave, might have been a couple of years ago now, that talked about bioretention, bioswales, and how they have to be inspected, and they're only good for so long, and then you got to go in and sort of redo it, kind of like a refresh. I don't remember the specific terminology for it, but in the standards, does it say how long they can go before that?
It doesn't stay in the standard details. I'd have to go back to the language in this manual. If there was a place to say that they needed to be revisited after 10 years, it would be in this manual.
Okay, because I think that would be not only an advice warning for the property owners at that point, saying, hey, you gotta keep this up. But then as the city grows, then that's more stuff for the city to have to inspect as well, to make sure that all these new bioretention, bioswales
That's correct.
Maintaining their functionality.
Right.
I'm just curious. I see Devil's Club on here. Isn't that kind of like Nettles? Is that something that you really want to have?
The expert has left the building.
be exposed to? Just remember as a kid, I was told, stay away from that.
Now people eat them. So Appendix M is going to be our stormwater development guidelines. This is also kind of a standalone document that is just going to help us with a lot of our stormwater development information as we have different projects that deal with this body of work. And I
Did we
think
skip
that's
over L?
I did go through L. Did I go fast?
Says Appendix L, details and specifications, but it doesn't say of what.
It's just all the standard details. It's a listing of all the standard details.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so Appendix M is the last one. And so that kind of concludes all of our complete document at this point. So now we'll continue to go through it and try to find any inconsistencies and clarify those, and start addressing comments as we get the comments in. I think the schedule right now is to come back in 2 weeks for public comment on this. And then should that, or after that, then next month, we're going to present this to the city council and get some comment and feedback from them.
Cool. There are a couple of things I'd sort of be interested in seeing as a summary. One is sort of an update schedule. I know you talked about making this more of a living document, possibly updating it with the comp plan and maybe annually or, biannually or however often it's needed. I'd be interested in seeing a bit more about that and kind of what the plans are for the city. Because this is a lot of work, and I think this is a great framework for success in the future. But I imagine there's probably still, this isn't the carved in stone sort of word of God document. The other thing I'd be interested in is seeing kind of a final summary of all the differences that have been introduced between the existing codes we have and the document that we have currently, because it sounds like there's been some upgrades and modernization and things like that. So rather than just copying all the existing documents we had into this and then everything is the same, it sounds like there will be some changes. So I'd be interested in seeing a summary of what those changes are.
That could be a little problematic, but we can certainly try to pick out the most significant ones. As we compare this to what's currently in the code, and then we are going to come back to you with code revisions to take information that's currently resting in the code and move that into this document where appropriate. And so that'll be one area that will, highlight some of these issues. You're completely correct. This is going to be a living document. Our plan is that as soon as this is adopted, we're going to be starting on the next edition, if not before that, and update it on an annual basis until it starts to reach, I think, the point where there's not a lot of changes all the time, and then maybe every other year after that. But we fully understand that this is our first shot at it, and we've included the kind of the less controversial issues that could slow it down for adoption, and recognizing that there's some more discussions to come, and then we'll include more design standards as those are resolved. So we will be coming back with next year. We'll be coming back next year with this.
Great. Well, this is a lot of good work, and I'm glad to see, I feel like this helps drive discussion a little bit more than what we had before, which is various sections in the municipal code that didn't necessarily relate. So it's very timely. Thanks for doing all this work.
Well, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
Anyone? I know we kind of posed our questions as we went through each section, but anybody have anything else? Not hearing or seeing anything, so thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so we are on item number 7, Director's Report.
I got to get up to the big kid table. So actually, Rich is going to come back to talk to you for a public hearing on July 10th. And we're in the process of, this document has been sent out for environmental comment. We made it environmental determination of non-significance, and then these documents for any code amendments and such get sent to Department of Commerce for review in other state agencies. So that process is occurring right along with what's going on here in the document as well. So just to kind of get you guys up to speed on what's going on behind the scenes as well. A couple of things to report. So City Council Subcommittee is making recommendations on boards and commissions on the 20th of this month. So that will include a recommendation to replace planning commissioner who is on city council. So we look forward to seeing what that recommendation is so we can have a full planning commission as part of that discussion. And then on the 26th of this month at your next planning commission meeting, we are going to be bringing a public participation plan. It doesn't require any formal action, but of the comp plan, wanted you guys to see it in city council of what we're proposing to do as far as public participation is part of the comp plan process, and just make sure that you folks know what's going on as we move forward. We're in the process of talking about that participation plan and making draft comments as far as staff goes, and getting input from city council on what they want to see with the city manager. And then would like to kind of land on a decision of what our branding is going to be as we start putting out public information materials. And so when somebody sees the comp plan process, that it looks similar throughout the next year and a half or so of where, oh, hey, that's part of the comp plan as we go out to 3rd of July, Tour de Terrace, National Night Out, in other events and other things online, that it has that look and feel that people are like, hey, this is part of that process. So we can hopefully get a lot of discussion and input moving forward, both on electronically and then also as part of folks just coming and being part of the process and different events that we're going to be doing as well. So that will be coming to you at the next meeting to take a look at. And then you guys were working on some of the state requirements from the State Building Code Council for building and fire code requirements that were supposed to be updated by July 1st of this year. Well, the state put the kibosh on that and are postponing that tentatively till, I believe, November 1st is what we're being told, although we don't know if that's going to happen. The reason is these code changes, which had to do with limiting gas, was challenged. State of California made some of these changes before Washington State. Those were appealed, and those appeals were successful. Courts found that some of the requirements were unconstitutional. So the State Building Council put a hold on some of these requirements that they had as part of these amendments to those codes, and are taking a further look at that. So not sure if you're, if we're going to see that again. We were ready to go as far as getting that adopted in time, but we'll see. And then if we have to make some amendments to that or whatever, then we'll be coming back to you guys just so you can take a look at that, whatever that looks like, in whatever form that looks like when we get there. But so everybody in the state was kind of put on hold for that adoption to move forward at this point. So just an update on that. Other than that, we're getting our deputy city manager later this week. Carolyn's coming. And we interviewed for an associate planner position today as well. We're kind of getting our different positions filled up finally in some of the engineering positions, and we're on the second week of our building inspector, so keep your fingers crossed on that. And so those are all good things of just where we're filling some of these positions that have been a year, 2 years, 3 years left unfilled. So we're excited about that and getting new people and good people on board to get some of our work done that we need to. So it's kind of what's going on. Unless you have any questions for me right now.
Anybody have questions for the director? No questions, no questions, shaking heads? Okay. I have got a few. So can you tell us a little bit about the new deputy city manager?
She lives in Edmonds currently. She comes, I believe, from the city of Burien, I want to say. Lan, do you know for sure? She was a person that interviewed for the city manager position, actually. I believe she worked for the city of Edmonds previously. I want to say, don't quote me on this stuff, but I believe that that's the case. And so she'll be taking oversight over engineering, CED, trying to think who else. I think parks. So will be a direct report to her. And then the city manager will have direct report with the police department and finance, which is pretty typical. But I know that she, I believe, is the parks director and has parks, I think, engineering and some planning background that she comes with. So looking forward to that, although we can't really replace Stefan.
Yeah.
And Stefan is actually still working on stuff. I get emails where he's commenting on things and such, so anyways. But yep, so that's kind of that, and I believe she starts this Thursday, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Well, either way, it sounds like it's a shorter commute for her.
Yes, I think she'll appreciate that commute.
Since she, kind of what you do and ancillary what we do, kind of a direct report to her, hopefully if she's got the time, she can swing on by and introduce herself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you guys will probably meet her as well. I think as far as planning goes, with Rich being a recovering planner, Jeff, our new city manager, being a recovering planner, and others, it's just nice because we have a relationship that we can talk about things both with you guys for the planning commission and then as far as council as well. So that's something nice that we have. So I think it will be good.
All right, now I got one more question. So the school district mailed out a notice that their proposal for, I guess they're changing some of their fields.
Yes.
And they mentioned in their notice that the jurisdiction, issued a determination of non-significance, which is fine. There's debate about synthetic fields versus grass field. I think they mentioned something about it being cork, so it sounds
Yes.
that might be healthier than a petroleum
It is.
product,
Yeah.
which is what they usually use on the field turfs now. But actually, my question has to do with a part of the field reconstruction it's apropos, since we were talking about street lighting, it's the field lighting. I don't know if those current fields have lighting like their baseball field has lighting, but it brought up a question that I've thought of for quite a while, and it might be an issue and maybe something that we have to visit in code, is how long are they allowed to keep the lights on at night?
Okay. I can check into that. I know that they're proposing, so they are doing the fields currently. They started out proposing crumb rubber, and that has moved to cork, which is a better environmental alternative than the crumb rubber. So that is a good change working with the district. I know that there were some stormwater impacts that Laura is addressing as well on the fields, and just making sure that those are taken care of. Agencies such as the school district can be the lead SEPA official, and so they were, which is not uncommon. Port districts, school districts, a lot of times they'll do the SEPA determination, and so the school district did that. So you're right, that's out for comment on their environmental review. I know they're proposing lighting as part of the fields, but I don't know. what the time limitation is on the lighting. I can get an answer for you as
that's-
far as,
That's something that we can control.
we can't, I'm not sure what our code says.
Okay.
I know that, light has to be shielded so it doesn't go over property, and those types of things. But yeah, we can put,
Yeah, it's-
restrictions on lighting. I'm not aware of what it says for like field lighting for baseball games or other sports activities and how late those lights can be on.
What's really frustrating is when it's 10 o'clock at night. There hasn't been any activity on those fields in almost 2 hours, and the lights are still on. And while, there might be the impression, okay, so how you measure it going over somebody's property line versus, those things are what, 60, 70,
Sure,
80 feet in
sure.
the air. You see it. It's still an impact, and
Right.
it's an annoying one. So, and honestly, it's something that I've thought about for years, and I either forget about it or I bite my tongue. But if they're going to be increasing the lighting, then I think now's the time to visit that.
Okay. Yeah, and I know that's going through.
And I already know what they're going to say is,
Process.
those night things, that they're renting those fields and it's revenue for them. But you know what? You shouldn't be renting those fields that late at night anyway, because that noise is an impact to the people that live around there as well.
Okay.
I will say, if you want to, so they also have been improving lighting technology. If you want an idea of maybe some older versus newer lighting, you could head to Evergreen Playfields. The Field 1 there has a more modern LED lighting that's a lot more directed, and the baseball field has like, the light of day shining down on you and the surrounding neighborhood. And like, it's a pretty marked difference. So if you wanted to check that out, I think that's a good like A to B comparison with some of the newer lighting systems versus some of the older lighting systems.
It'll be interesting to see, more of the stuff that Laura's working on with that area as well, because back in the day, the original high school was right up close to 44th, where the high school is now used to be more of a lower elevation. Nobody bothered to ask why the field was always wet year-round, even in the height of hot summer, until they started building the high school and realized, oh, this is a marsh, basically. And then that delayed the new school for like a year and a half while they drove in a bunch of piles. But the ball fields were original to the original high school. The baseball stadium, which is turf now, but used to be grass. The softball field used to be where the staff parking is now. But all of that used to be green vegetation area, and they are fields, and they're, I don't know if it's like what you would call like a dry creek, or, kind of like
There is, yeah.
their runoff system. That used to be more nature-scaped on the northern side of the property, and it was almost like you could traipse around there and pretend you were in the wilderness almost, versus now where it's very engineered. And,
Sure.
all the vegetation's removed, and, it's a lot different what it used to be, but that creek used to exist there, so I can see why there might be some additional, water issues that are still.
Yeah, and stormwater has to be addressed right there because that's designated as such. So it's something that we're working on for sure.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. So I'm curious if at some point they'll want to do something with the football field as well.
Yeah, I don't know of anything. I do know that they've got some grant funding for health services at the high school. And so just recently heard about that. We don't have an application on hand, but
Perhaps, like a nurse or?
having potentially a portable for expanded health care services for lower income and the student population at the high school. So there's a program, I think, with some grant funding that the school districts, I believe, has been successful in obtaining. So we'll be working with them to.
The school was originally built, they do have it, there's like sort of a little nurse's med
Sure.
office, but maybe if they're expanding their offerings.
I think
they would want
expanding the offerings and trying to, do more for their student population. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
Where they put that.
I'm not really sure right now. I'm sure we'll have a pre-app coming up here in figure out all of those things about how to do that,
I'm
but
sure staff doesn't want to give up their parking, so that's probably the student parking area, which that ebbs and flows.
sure,
There was a time when the student population was much higher before they mucked around with their education plan and everybody bailed. And you would have overflow parking in the neighborhood, and it was quite an inconvenience because it's not only overflow parking, but it's a bunch of teenagers who have no respect for people's property. To the point where there was discussions at the time about, do we need some sort of zone parking there? So it's like, you gotta live in this street or this neighborhood to park here, because either there was no student parking or they didn't want to pay the student parking fee, so they would just park
Sure.
in the neighborhood. But that was back when it was a 4A school, and now they're barely a 3, I think there's actually a 2A school right now. So the parking issue isn't as bad right now, but if they put the portable in a parking lot and their
Sure.
student population goes up again, now all of a sudden, you've got a pre-built parking stall that you're not utilizing as parking, that you're utilizing for something else, forcing, students.
yeah, we'll have to take a look at all the site planning. I think the difference is there's just so many alternatives to education, running start, and different alternatives of when, like I was going to high school, there was one way back in the day. So, I think that disperses like the student population a little bit more. So we'll take a look at that for sure once we get an application in. But I know that that's something that's kind of on the horizon as well for the school district.
Interesting. All right. Just double checking. Anybody else have any questions for staff? Not hearing, seeing anything? Okay. So we'll go ahead and move on to item number 8, miscellaneous business by calling planning commissioners. Does anybody have any miscellaneous business? None. Trying to remember to look at the screen. How you doing over there? All right, if nobody has any miscellaneous business, I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right, good night. Isaac,
Hold
you
on.
look like you're in space.
Regarding Vice Chair Sandoval, because we had not received any response from him regarding to this meeting, so would you like to wait until next meeting?
Yeah, we'll just wait
All right.
in the next meeting
Yeah,
for that.
okay, thank you.